Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Turin here with another Warhammer Total War online commentary. In this particular battle, I will be playing the Greenskins, and I will be facing off against the Dwarves. So definitely hurts my soul just a little bit to fight against the Dwarves, to go after my own people, but you know, from time to time, it must be done. So in the front line here, I have Doomdiver catapults. So I actually have three of them. Against the Dwarves, I feel like artillery is very, very cost effective, and especially these guys, considering how accurate they are, they can just do devastating damage to enemy quarrelers. And also, the Dwarves usually come in a very tight formation, so it can be cost effective in that regard as well. So three Doomdiver catapults in the front line. I have some fodder. So these are just some lads. They'll just absorb the initial shock, take the initial missile fire, and a lot of these black orcs, which are just the MVPs against the dwarves, guys. These guys are just heavily armored, armor piercing, and they do so well at cutting through dwarvish infantry because pretty much everything the dwarves bring is armored. If you guys take a look, Longbeards have 95, Quarrelers even have 80 armor, Iron Drakes have 120, the Lord has 120, just very, very heavily armored faction. So there are a few things more cost effective against the dwarves than black orcs. In the back here, I have an Orc Shaman with the Big Wa. I have a Goblin Big Boss just for circle harass, you know, going around the back, just being annoying. Then, of course, an Orc War Boss, which I believe against the Dwarves, you should always put on a Wyvern because he can actually deal with Gyrocopters pretty well, especially considering he has a potion. Then, of course, I have two groups of, I believe, what are these guys? They're hidden in the forest. Orc Boar Boys. So I felt I didn't need the more expensive version because these guys, they're armor piercing and they have anti-infantry. That's pretty much everything you need. And again, they're very cheap by cavalry standards, and they'll do a good job at cycle charging and should cover your bases on that front. Then, of course, in the far wings over here, I also have a group of Goblin Wolf Riders, which I'm an advocate of always bringing at least one of. So my opponent, front line of Longbeards, which is a little risky. I think he should have brought the Longbeards with great weapons because these guys are just going to get cut up by Black Orcs. And he's relying very heavily on these two Hammerers here to really deal with my armor. And just having them, especially when I have these cavalry that can cycle charge them, is a little risky. But regardless, we'll see how it pans out. He has a Runesmith. He has High King Thorgrim. He also has Iron Drakes with Trollhammer torpedoes, which I'm a big fan of. And then he also has some Quarrelers here, which are a pretty decent choice against Greenskins, as most of their troops are not heavily armored. So without further ado, guys, let's go ahead and get started. So he sends his Gyrocopter out right away, which is to be expected, but I do send my Orc War Boss right after him. And that's why I sometimes like to bring multiple, so if he does chase one, the other one can shoot at the War Boss while this one runs, that kind of thing. So bringing one, it's usually, I don't know, it hasn't worked out that well for me, but regardless, you can see my Doomdivers guys are already shooting in there, and look at the damage they already did to the Trollhammers. It's just really, really hard for the Dwarves to deal with, in my opinion. So regardless, he's taking some heavy fire from those guys, and it's going to generate some pretty good results considering how freaking accurate these guys are by siege standards. So you can see they're flying in there and just wreaking massive havoc on the dwarvish line. We'll go ahead and take a look at the HP damage. So these Quarrelers already down 25% HP. These Longbeards already have taken substantial damage, so definitely a very, very brutal thing. So at the same time, my Orc War Boss did chase off those Gyrocopters who he is now keeping in the wing. I have my cavalry heading out, and my main infantry force is just getting ready to engage. So he has the High King leading the charge here. His dwarves are carrying him. I love that animation. Always a good time. So he does leave his hammers in the wings, which I think was a bit of a mistake. He should have left Longbeards because these guys are going to do very poorly against cycle charging. And you guys can see the Goblin Wolf Riders actually got a nice flank on those Trollhammers and are doing great work. But he does take a cycle charge here. Well, I wouldn't call it a cycle charge yet, but he does take a charge. You can see they all get knocked over, and I simply just run away, having, you know, gotten pretty good results and taken almost no damage on my guys. So, and that also keeps them away from the main battle because this force here is going to do really horribly against Black Orcs without the help of the Hammerers. And you can see he's allocating the Hammerers to defend the flanks, which is not what you want to be doing. And again, those Iron Drakes are taking some serious losses from not only the Doomdiver catapults, but also from the charging. So right now you can see the poor dwarves are just getting run over by these cheap cavalry. They're not even good cav. And just the cycle charging is very hard for Hammers to deal with. He definitely needs Longbeards, who have the charge defense against all to deal with them. But regardless, Hammers still hit pretty hard. So they're going to, once they do get engaged, you can see they're already forcing these guys to waver, which isn't bad. In the main line, it looks like everybody's engaged. Black Orcs are engaged with Longbeards, which is an extremely advantageous situation. Not to mention, guys, this is the dream situation. You want to get Goblins mixed in with elite infantry because then the Longbeards are going to... You see most of the Longbeards are hitting Goblins, and the Black Orcs, all of the Black Orcs are hitting the high-value Longbeards. So definitely a very, very good combination of those type of troops, and I think that's something you should do in all matchups, is incorporate these type of fodder units with elite infantry, because these, if you guys take a look at the HP, Black Orcs are still full health, and they've been fighting for a good 30 seconds, and you can see the Longbeards are already starting to take substantial losses compared to the Black Orcs. This group's going better for my opponent because he does have Thorgrim Grudgebearer in there doing pretty decent work, and it looks like my opponent did bring back his Gyrocopter with the Brimstone Gun, which hopefully will do some pretty good work for him. At the same time, I did peel off the Orc War Boss and use a potion, and I was just you putting all my resources towards cycle charging these hammers, pulling in and out, and you know, just if they're gone, he really has no anti-armor left, and it's going to be hard for him to finish off my my forces here. So again, just periodically charging through the enemy lines, and I'm telling you guys, Orc boys, even just the standard Orc war boys, are pretty good. And against Dwarves, I feel you don't really need to invest in the more expensive variant, and that also allows you to get more infantry in your front line, like an extra group of Black Orcs, for example. And the Dwarves are definitely having a hard time keeping up, though they are chasing them and waving their hammers about. Very, very cool. You can see they're getting some nice hits, guys, and now these Longbeards got in here, and they're doing a good job at also tying up my cavalry. So my cav are having to flee, but regardless, they are a very cheap, relatively disposable cav unit. So, and also the Goblin Big Boss is in here. He's doing pretty well for himself, and also has a potion of toughness. So, in the meantime, the Black Orcs are just putting up a huge fight in the front line. And now that my Goblins have routed off, my opponent's forces are actually starting to, you know, get a decent engagement on the Black Orcs. And even though they don't have armor piercing, Dwarvish infantry have their leadership will keep them in the fight. I mean, you can see they're down to 23 models. They're still steady, guys. I mean, now they're finally shaken, but after taking so many losses. And the High King here, he's definitely been putting up a good fight, but look at the buffs. They have Ere We Go, Fists of Gork, and the Wa. Thorgrim is not going to last long in here, and now that the Orc War Boss has found him, I think he has met the end of his days and will most likely be going down here after a few more swings. And there he goes. Definitely put up a good fight. You got to respect him for that. And these Black Orcs over here were also able to chase off some of the Dwarves. And you can see, guys, these cav back here are just very, very tricky to deal with, and the hammers are just getting cycle charged all day, and at the same time taking Doom Diver fire. So that's a very tough situation being as the Dwarves. But I think in this particular matchup, having perhaps the armor-piercing troops in the front and the shielded, charge-resistant troops kind of in the wings and creating a defensive pocket, because he really didn't protect his missile troops. Well, I mean, he did, but he used hammers, which can do it, but also they're very subject to the cycle charging, not having charge resistance themselves. Also, perhaps bringing additional gyrocopters, maybe cutting a group of Longbeards just to pinch in an extra group would have really helped, because then he could have circle strafed, which means you have the one group shooting at the War Boss. When the War Boss chases it, the other group shoots at him, etc., etc. It's very micro-intensive, but it can usually, you know, deal with enemy flying leadership as the Dwarves. So quick breakdown here. You guys can see the Black Orcs did great work with 97 kills, and they barely took any damage because the Goblins, even though they do have low leadership, they stuck in there, and, you know, whenever you see the Goblins this low, you know they've done their job. At the same time, the Orc War Boys did pretty well at cycle charging, but the Doom Divers against the Dwarves were just the true MVP. So definitely a good game there. As far as my opponent's army, probably bring a few, like maybe cut these two Longbeards here and just keep 3 and then bring 3 with great weapons. He probably would have been able to win that front line, or at least do much better, because with Thorgrim's buffs and the Runesmith, the Longbeards with great weapons would have done well, and then that would have allowed him to maybe use a group or 2 of these in the back to defend against the cycle charging. And also the Iron Drakes with Trollhammer torpedoes, they can work in the Greenskin matchup, but personally, I know I've used them in that matchup and had some success, but it's definitely a risky play, but you have to accommodate them in your rear defensive formation, and, you know, they got charged immediately by Goblin Wolf Riders, which is 300 resources for 1,200 essentially. So anyways, really good game to my opponent with Dr. Wu. Always good to play against a fellow Dwarf player, and hope you guys enjoyed that game. More content coming soon. Take care.